The Panama Canal was originally created after a French construction team failed in the 1880s, when the United States began building a canal across a 50-mile section of the small Panama Isthmus in 1904. The eradication of disease-carrying mosquitoes aided the project, while head engineer John Stevens pioneered novel procedures and pushed for the critical redesign from sea level to lock canal. His successor, Lieutenant Colonel George Washington Goethals, increased excavation efforts in a refractory mountain range and oversaw the construction of the dams and locks. The world-famous Panama Canal, which opened in 1914, was turned over from the United States to Panama in 1999. When was the Panama Canal built? The notion of building a water channel across the Isthmus of Panama to connect the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans dates back at least to the 1500s. After explorer Vasco Núñez de Balboa discovered a short strip of land between the two oceans, King Charles I of Spain directed his regional governor to study a route along the Chagres River. The feasibility of such a route across the rugged, tropical terrain was judged unfeasible at the time, but the idea remained alluring as a potential shortcut from Europe to Eastern Asia. The only other option was to sail around South America through the dangerous and unpredictable Strait of Magellan, or to use the Panama Railroad to transport goods and people from one ocean to another. France was ultimately the first country to try the assignment. Count Ferdinand de Lesseps, the builder of Egypt's Suez Canal, led the construction team that broke ground on a projected sea-level canal in 1880. The French rapidly realized they faced a massive challenge. In addition to the constant rains that produced heavy landslides, there was no efficient way to control the spread of yellow fever and malaria. De Lesseps later realized that a sea-level canal was too complex and redirected work toward a locked canal, but funding was withdrawn from the project in 1888. Teddy Roosevelt and the Panama Canal. Following the discussions of the United States Isthmian Canal Commission and a push from President Theodore Roosevelt, the United States paid $40 million for the French assets in the canal zone in 1902. When a planned treaty granting rights to construct in what was then Colombian territory was refused, the United States threw its military weight behind a Panamanian independence movement, eventually reaching an agreement with the new administration. On November 6, 1903, the United States recognized the Republic of Panama, and on November 18, the Hay-Bunau-Varilla Treaty was signed with Panama, providing America exclusive and permanent ownership of the canal zone. Panama received $10 million in exchange, along with a $250,000 annuity that began 9 years later. Many Panamanians saw the pact, negotiated by U.S. Secretary of State John Hay and French engineer Philippe Jean Bunau-Varilla, as an infringement on their country's newly established national sovereignty. The Americans, perhaps unaware of the lessons learned from the French operation, proposed a sea-level canal along the roughly 50-mile route from Cologne to Panama City. The project was officially launched with a dedication ceremony on May 4, 1904, but head engineer John Wallace met immediate difficulties. Much of the French equipment was in need of repair, and the outbreak of yellow fever and malaria scared the workers away. Wallace quit after a year of being pressured to keep construction going. John Stevens. In July 1905, a railroad specialist called John Stevens took over as head engineer, and he promptly handled staffing difficulties by recruiting West Indian workers. Stevens bought new equipment and created efficient methods to speed up operations, such as using a swinging boom to lift pieces of railroad track and modifying the train path to transport excavated dirt. He also rapidly realized the challenges posed by landslides and persuaded Roosevelt that a lock canal was the best option for the terrain. Dr. William Gorgas, the chief sanitary officer, was a huge aid to the effort because he felt mosquitoes spread the area's dangerous diseases. Gorgas launched on a crusade to eradicate the carriers, with his staff meticulously fumigating residences and cleaning pools of water. The last known incidence of yellow fever on the isthmus was in November 1905, and malaria cases fell precipitously during the next decade. Although building was on schedule when President Roosevelt visited the area in November 1906, the project was stalled when Stevens abruptly resigned a few months later. Infuriated, Roosevelt appointed Army Corps engineer Lieutenant Colonel George Washington Goethals as the new chief engineer, giving him control over nearly all administrative concerns in the construction zone. Goethals demonstrated his no-nonsense leadership by breaking up a work strike shortly after taking command, but he also managed the construction of facilities to improve the quality of life for workers and their families. Panama Canal dangers. Goethals concentrated their efforts on the Culebra Cut, which cleared the mountain range between Gamboa and Pedro Miguel. Excavating the roughly 9-mile length became a 24-hour operation, with up to 6,000 workers working at any given time. Despite the attention paid to this phase of the project, Culebra Cut was a notorious risk zone, with casualties resulting from unanticipated landslides and dynamite blasts. The construction of the locks began with the pouring of concrete at Gatton in August 1909. Built in pairs, each chamber measuring 110 feet wide by 1,000 feet long, the locks were outfitted with culverts that used gravity to raise and drop water levels. The canal path included 3 locks that elevated ships 85 feet above sea level to the man-made Gatton Lake in the center. Hollow, buoyant lock gates were also made, with heights ranging from 47 to 82 feet. The entire business was powered by electricity and operated via a control board. Panama Canal completed. In 1913, work on the enormous project began to wind down. In May, 2 steam shovels collided in Culebra Cut. Shortly after, the last spillway of Gatton Dam was closed, allowing the lake to reach its full height. In October, President Woodrow Wilson activated a telegraph at the White House, causing the Gamboa Dike to explode and flood the final section of dry tunnel at Culebra. The Panama Canal was formally inaugurated on August 15, 1914, although the intended spectacular event was postponed owing to the onset of World War I. It cost more than $350 million to complete and was the most costly construction project in U.S. history at the time. Approximately 3.4 million cubic meters of concrete were used to create the locks, with nearly 240 million cubic yards of rock and earth removed during the American construction phase. However, many people perished while completing the Panama Canal. Between 1904 and 1913, over 5,600 workers were reported to have been killed, though the true figure is likely significantly higher because the French only registered deaths that happened in hospitals. The Panama Canal cost the United States around $375 million, which includes the $10 million paid to Panama and the $40 million paid to the French when they abandoned the project. At the time, it was the most expensive construction project in American history. Impact of the Panama Canal. The Panama Canal, bolstered by the construction of Madden Dam in 1935, proved to be a critical component in developing global commerce routes in the 20th century. The shift to local management began with a 1977 pact signed by U.S. President Jimmy Carter and Panamanian President Omar Torrijos, with the Panama Canal Authority taking complete control on December 31, 1999. In 1994, the American Society of Civil Engineers named the canal one of the 7 wonders of the contemporary world, and in September 2010, it hosted its 1 millionth passing ship. According to 2019 figures, the United States remains the Panama Canal's most frequent user. 66% of its cargo traffic originated or finished at a U.S. port, while goods from or to China accounted for 13%.